Dinner was ready, the table was perfectly set, as usual. Lighted candles, soft wine resting next to the dishes. The atmosphere was calm, welcoming. Nothing seemed out of place until he arrived. He sat down. He occupied a space that did not belong to him. His gaze didn't waver, his posture was firm, as if he was too comfortable for someone who hadn't been invited. Uncomfortability filled the air before any words were even spoken. Everything became cold, silent, almost unbearable. The heart beat in the throat while the eyes sought an explanation from the only person who could offer it. "Who are you and why did you sit at our table?" The sound of his own voice seemed distant, strange, as if it hadn't actually been spoken. Then came the answer. An answer that not only cut the air, but pierced the soul, reduced everything to dust, crushed any trace of certainty that might still exist. "He's the one I truly love." Time stopped. The world simply collapsed there, without warning, with no chance of defense. As if reality were slipping through our fingers, dissolving into a dense, suffocating fog. My stomach turned, my mind spun, my breath hitched. Every muscle in his body felt frozen, unable to process this. Dinner, previously meticulously prepared, now no longer made sense. The untouched dishes, the tasteless wine, the candles flickering in the dark, making everything even more ironic. Was that it? Was this how a story built over years ended? At a dinner? With an intruder sitting there, taking possession of what wasn't yours? Was this what was left after so long? A blank stare, a cruel sentence and an oppressive silence. The shock was replaced by anger. For the humiliation. For the pain of realizing that betrayal was not an accident, a momentary mistake. No. It was a choice. A calculated, planned decision, meticulously sustained until that moment. How many dinners came before this one? How many times had she been with him and gone home pretending nothing had happened? How many lies, how many false touches, how many empty promises were said while her heart already belonged to someone else? The intruder said nothing. It didn't need to. His presence was already an insult, a dry and deep blow, a poison that corroded everything that was once love. And her? She didn't seem sorry. She didn't seem shaken. There was no hesitation in his words, not even a trace of doubt. Just the biting coldness of someone who had already made their decision a long time ago and now only fulfilled the inevitable. The memories came in an avalanche. The beginning, the love, the plans, the shared dreams. Every detail now seemed like a farce, a piece of cheap theater staged to hide what was really happening behind the scenes. How did you not notice before? How did you not notice the signs, the averted glances, the hurried kisses, the empty apologies? How could he trust blindly, give himself completely, only to be discarded like that, without ceremony, in front of a stranger who took his place without the slightest embarrassment? His hands shook, his chest burned, the ground felt unstable beneath his feet. The questions came like daggers, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been happening? Since when did she love him? When did love start to die without him noticing? When did it stop being enough? And most importantly, why? Why him? Why now? Why this way? The lover finally spoke, his voice was firm, sure, as if he knew exactly what his role in this scene was. As if he knew there was nothing that could be said to ease the pain. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain anything. Just stared. Maybe waiting for a reaction, maybe waiting for something to break, for voices to be raised, for chaos to take over. But there was none of that. Just the heavy, suffocating silence, the weight of a betrayal revealed without mercy, without shame, without the slightest consideration for who was on the other side of the table. And then, the detail that made everything turn into an even bigger nightmare. The lover was not a stranger. The name, the face, the voice. Everything made sense now. The betrayal was even deeper, more cruel, more unbearable than anyone could imagine. The initial shock gave way to a cold, cutting, overwhelming hatred. The kind of hate that comes from disappointment, from the breach of trust, from the final blow to everything that has ever been built. She didn't just choose another man. He chose someone who should never have been there. He chose someone who made everything even worse, even more degrading. The bitter taste of betrayal became unbearable. Dinner, candles, wine, the table, everything lost its meaning. Nothing else mattered. Nothing, except a single question that rang in my mind over and over again. Why him? Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is not glamorized, on the contrary, our stories show the devastating impact it has on people's lives. All narratives are fictional, but the pain, shock and consequences are real. The goal? Exposing the naked truth: betrayal destroys homes, hearts and lives. Get ready for an intense story, full of twists and emotions. Take a deep breath, because what comes next will surprise you. The restaurant was cozy that night, lit by yellowish lights that created a calm and intimate atmosphere. The discreet scent of fresh herbs and freshly prepared dishes hung in the air, mixed with the soft sound of distant conversations. Sitting next to the window, Daniel and Emily seemed, to any observer, a happy and aligned couple. He, wearing a dress shirt folded at the cuffs, exuded a natural serenity, conveying the confidence of a man who felt comfortable next to the woman he loved. She, in turn, maintained a contained smile, her fingers playing absently with the rim of the wine glass, as if there were a whirlwind of thoughts trying to escape through her expression. Daniel has always been a man of principles. From an early age, I believed that a relationship should be built on respect, trust and mutual commitment. His marriage to Emily was, for him, the greatest proof of this. He not only loved her, but admired her deeply. Her every gesture, every spontaneous laugh, every complicit look were vivid reminders of why he had chosen to share his life by her side. He remembered when he met her, the immediate charm he felt for her vibrant personality, for the way she seemed to see the world in a different light. As the years passed, that charm turned into something even more solid, a connection he believed to be unbreakable. Emily, on the other hand, was a nuanced woman. She had always been independent, strong and determined, but there was an almost imperceptible restlessness in her eyes. In the first years of marriage, she felt completely fulfilled. Daniel was everything she expected in a partner: attentive, reliable, someone she could count on for all of life's small and big decisions. With him, she learned the meaning of stability, of a peaceful love that didn't require constant tests, that didn't waste itself in emotional games. But over time, a silent shadow settled inside her. It wasn't lack of love, nor ingratitude, but a feeling that something was missing, that a part of oneself was asleep, waiting to be awakened. Routine had become an inevitable factor in their relationship. It wasn't something visible, not even something they could pinpoint, but it was there, slowly infiltrating daily gestures. The conversations, once full of enthusiasm, had become predictable. The passionate kisses gave way to hurried pecks before work. Long glances were replaced by a focus on cell phones, trivial notifications, and last-minute emails. There were no fights, nor heated arguments. Just a space between the two that, without them realizing it, grew a little more every day. That night, at the restaurant, Daniel wanted to break this cycle. He always believed that happiness in marriage was not a straight line, but a path made of ups and downs, of new beginnings and rediscoveries. I wanted to bring back the emotion from the beginning, rekindle the flame that seemed dormant. He had planned that dinner with care, reserving the best seat in the restaurant, choosing her favorite wine, preparing every detail to make it a memorable night. Emily smiled when he held her hand across the table, but there was something different in his gaze. A hesitation, a glimmer of nostalgia mixed with something he couldn't decipher. "Remember our first time here?" Daniel asked, trying to capture her attention. Emily nodded, a wistful smile escaping her lips. "I was so nervous I spilled wine on my shirt." He laughed, trying to bring lightness to the moment. She laughed along, but her laugh came short, almost mechanical, as if she were just there out of obligation. That night went on like so many others. They talked about work, about future commitments, about good memories they had shared. But deep down, Daniel felt something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it. The way Emily avoided eye contact for too long, how distracted she seemed, how she responded with too many careful words. He tried to dismiss the idea that something was changing, he preferred to believe it was just tiredness, a difficult day. After all, every couple goes through moments like this. It was just a phase, he told himself. The following days unfolded with the same apparent normality. Emily left for work early and returned late in the afternoon, tired, but always ready to talk about banalities. Daniel tried to ignore the growing feeling of distance, focusing on what had always worked, attention, affection, efforts to keep her happy. But there was a new detail, something small, but it started to bother him. Emily was different. Small gestures that were once natural now felt forced. She started to dress up more to go out, to check her cell phone with unusual frequency, to smile at messages that she never explained. Daniel didn't want to be the kind of man who was suspicious for no reason, so he pushed those concerns to the back of his mind. One afternoon, while organizing some drawers at home, he found a different perfume in Emily's closet. It wasn't one he knew, nor one she used to use. It was a stronger, more striking scent, different from the discreet style that had always been part of her. He held the small bottle between his fingers, feeling a discomfort he couldn't name. Emily was always particular about her tastes, she rarely changed anything without reason. So why that new perfume? He didn't ask. He preferred to believe that it was a simple choice to change, that it meant nothing more than that. Weekends also started to change. Before, they spent Saturdays together, cooking, watching movies or simply talking about life. Now, Emily invented unexpected appointments. She claimed that she needed to visit a friend, that she had work events, that she was too busy to stay at home. Daniel tried not to think about it too much, tried to convince himself that it was normal, that she needed time to herself. But inside him, something was already screaming. A part of him already knew that normality was just an illusion that he insisted on keeping alive. The day of dinner arrived without Daniel realizing how much things had changed. He wanted to believe that dinner was a fresh start, an opportunity to reconnect with Emily. He wanted to see in her the same woman he fell in love with, he wanted that moment to be like before, when a simple meeting was enough to fill any void. But there was something about the way she carried herself, as if she were carrying a secret that kept her from being there completely. And then, the moment the restaurant door opened and a man approached the table, everything changed. Time slowed down. Daniel felt the weight of the inevitable before any words were spoken. The dinner that was supposed to be a fresh start was about to turn into something very different. Something he could never predict. The man's presence at the table made time seem like an illusion. Daniel didn't recognize him, but the way Emily reacted, the way she looked away, the way her fingers clenched against the fabric of the towel, the way the air seemed to have been drained from her breath, everything indicated that he wasn't a stranger to her. He sat down without asking permission, as if that seat already belonged to him. His gaze was confident, firm, almost challenging. Daniel expected an explanation, something that would bring coherence to that absurd scene, but Emily remained silent for long seconds, as if fighting an inevitable truth. And then came the sentence that destroyed any trace of normality that might still remain. "He's the one I truly love." The words were spoken without hesitation, as if they had already been practiced countless times in his mind. Daniel blinked, trying to absorb the impact, but his body refused to react. His chest tightened, his hands sweated, a cold heat ran down his spine. Every detail of that night seemed to dissolve into a blur, as if the restaurant, the voices around it, even existence itself were falling apart. He didn't know how to process this. I didn't know if I should scream, stand up, laugh nervously, doubt what I had heard. All he could feel was crushing, suffocating pain, as if something inside him had irreversibly broken. Emily, the one he loved, the one he protected, the one he placed above everything else, was there, in front of him, confessing, without apparent guilt, that her heart no longer belonged to him. Daniel felt the bitter taste of humiliation. He thought about the nights he waited for her while she said she was busy, about the kisses that no longer had the same heat, about the new perfume that had never been for him. It was as if every little doubt accumulated over the last few months was now coming together to form a truth so clear and brutal that it was impossible to ignore. The man at the table said nothing. He just watched. His look wasn't one of guilt, but one of possession. As if he knew he had already won this battle before Daniel even realized he was fighting. That hurt even more. The silence between the three became unbearable. Emily finally let out a sigh and, for the first time, looked directly at him. "I wanted to tell you before, but I never knew how. I didn't want to hurt you." The irony was so great that Daniel laughed. A dry, empty laugh, a reflection of someone who no longer knows how to react in the face of absurdity. "You didn't want to hurt him?" After months of lying, of sharing her life with another man while coming home and pretending everything was fine. After looking him in the eye every morning like he was still his. After sitting at his table and accepting his love without hesitation, knowing that he had already betrayed him in every way possible. Emily tried to touch his hand on the table, but he backed away. "Don't make this any harder than it already is," she whispered, as if trying to calm him. As if he was the problem there. As if he was reacting irrationally to something he should simply accept. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the air burn his lungs. His thoughts were confused, but one thing was certain, he couldn't bear to stay there for another second. He got up, his legs feeling heavy, his entire body exhausted from a pain that seemed to consume his vital force. Emily called his name, but he didn't respond. He just walked away, feeling the eyes of everyone in the restaurant fixed on him, feeling that, at that moment, he had become the protagonist of a grotesque spectacle that no one wanted to look away from. He walked out into the street, the cold night hitting his face, but the pain inside him was so intense that no temperature could match what he felt. She walked aimlessly, trying to understand when everything started to fall apart, when it stopped being enough for her. What did he do wrong? What was missing? At what point did Emily decide that their love was no longer worth it? Time passed without him noticing. Minutes? Hours? I did not know. He just walked, lost, carrying the unbearable weight of betrayal. His mind was filled with images, with memories now distorted by the poison of doubt. How many times did she come home after being with that man? How many times did he lie next to you, knowing that he had already given his body and soul to another? He stopped at the door of the house, but didn't have the courage to go in. He knew that this place, which had once been his refuge, was now just a reminder of everything he lost. His world had collapsed in a single instant and nothing he did could fix it. But one question persisted, pounding in his mind, refusing to be ignored. Who was that man? And why did Emily choose him? Daniel spent the night awake. The clock marked hours that didn't make sense, the hands seemed to spin without direction, reflecting the chaos within it. Emily's betrayal was already an unbearable pain, but there was something beyond, something he couldn't name. An uncomfortable feeling that didn't just come from the loss, but from the way it all happened. The dinner, the tone of her voice, the other man's silence, the look he gave Daniel as if he wasn't just a lover, but someone who knew him. That tormented him more than anything else. He was not a stranger. And Emily had never said her name. The cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. He ignored it. Minutes later, again. When he finally picked up the device, he saw dozens of messages. Some from Emily, others from mutual friends. Everyone seemed to know about the betrayal, or at least suspected it. His name was finally there on the screen. He wasn't a stranger. It was Michael. There was no air. Daniel's chest tightened. The name echoed in the mind like a dull scream. Michael. It couldn't be. His entire body tensed, an avalanche of memories came with full force, crushing any trace of rationality. He knew Michael. I knew it very well. He stood up abruptly, grabbing his car keys. His mind already knew the truth even before any confirmation. He drove without seeing clearly, the headlights cutting through the dawn while the world seemed to collapse around him. Everything he believed in, everything he considered safe, had been mercilessly ripped away. He stopped in front of Emily's house, but didn't ring the doorbell. He just waited, sitting in the car, his eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting that, at dawn, everything would reveal itself to be a cruel delusion. But the door opened. And there he was. Michael. Daniel's eyes fixed on his face. And it all made sense. The silence at dinner, the security with which he sat at the table, the way Emily avoided looking at him. Michael wasn't just any lover. He wasn't just any man. He was Daniel's brother. His breathing hitched, his fingers gripped the steering wheel so hard that the knots turned white. Betrayal was already unbearable, but this? This was beyond what any nightmare could have created. Michael and Emily. All the time. Under your nose. How did he not notice? He got out of the car with uncontrolled momentum. Michael saw him and knew he couldn't run away. Emily appeared close behind, her face pale, her eyes wide, but she said nothing. There were no words that could justify that. There was no argument capable of explaining it. Daniel approached, his heart beating so hard it seemed to explode. You? His voice came out trembling, taken by the weight of the revelation. Michael remained silent for a moment, then lowered his head. I didn't want it to be like this. Daniel's blood boiled. You didn't want it to be like that? His laugh came bitter, ironic, broken. So explain it to me, Michael. How did you want it to be? How exactly did you plan to steal my wife? Emily intervened, her voice cracking. Daniel, please let me explain. Explain? He looked at her with a contempt he never thought he was capable of feeling. There is no explanation for this. You destroyed everything. Not just between us, but between me and him. I will never be able to look at him the same way again. I will never be able to trust anyone the same way again. Michael finally raised his head. I owe you the truth. Now do you want to give me the truth? Daniel took a step forward, his face just inches from his. Now that everything has been destroyed. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes full of guilt. Me and Emily, we've been closer for longer than you know. Daniel recoiled, as if he had been struck. Longer? What do you mean by that? Emily lowered her eyes. It was before we got married. The world spun. No. He shook his head, refusing to accept it. Yes, Michael confirmed. Before your wedding, we had already been together. She chose me first, but then. He swallowed hard. So she chose you. Daniel felt a bitter taste in his mouth. The stomach turned. So I was a consolation prize, his voice came low, but full of venom. It wasn't like that, Emily tried desperately. I loved you. I tried to move on. But something between us never died. Daniel laughed, but it was an empty laugh, full of pain. So all these years were a lie. You've been torn between us this whole time. It was never about choice, Michael responded. It was about feeling. And the feeling never went away. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to contain the despair that threatened to take him over. As if his entire life had been built on quicksand. As if nothing he experienced had been real. You too, while I believed I had a faithful wife, while I thought my brother was my family, you two were doing this behind my back. Emily was crying now, but Daniel felt no mercy. You have to believe I tried to resist, Daniel. I did. No, he said, his gaze cold. You never tried. You just waited until you couldn't hide it anymore. Michael took a step forward, but Daniel backed away. Stay away from me. I don't have a brother anymore. You died to me. Michael hung his head, defeated. Emily was sobbing, but Daniel no longer felt anything. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a huge void. Now I understand, he murmured. Now it all makes sense. I never had you, Emily. And I never had you, Michael. You were always each other's. He turned his back, walking away. Each step was a farewell, a deep cut into the past. He didn't look back. There was nothing left there for him. And for the first time since it all started, Daniel felt like he was free. The early morning cold cut into Daniel's skin as he walked aimlessly. His feet moved forward, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in a whirlwind of emotions that consumed him from the inside out. Michael and Emily's words still echoed in his head, like a hammer beating over and over again, shattering every memory, every moment he once held true. The betrayal was already a deep wound, but the truth that came with it was a blow that left no room for healing. The past was a lie. All the years of marriage, the promises, the plans, everything fell apart like shattered glass on the floor. Emily was never his. The love he believed to be solid, loyal, unshakable never existed in the way he thought. Every smile, every look, every word of affection were now shadows of a mistake, proof of a love that was never true. But perhaps what hurt most was Michael. His own brother. The blood bond that should be impenetrable, the trust that should be unquestionable, destroyed in the worst way possible. The world seemed darker than before. The streets were empty, the wind whistled between the buildings, and the distant lights flickered meaninglessly. His body was there, but his mind was a battlefield. A part of him wanted to face them both again, demand more answers, make them feel at least a fragment of the pain he carried now. Another part wanted to disappear to a place where I didn't have to deal with the truth. But he knew that none of these options would change what had already been done. The past couldn't be erased, and the future, well, the future seemed like a bottomless abyss. He stopped on a random corner, his eyes fixed on the distorted reflection of himself in a windowpane. He didn't recognize himself. The man staring back looked exhausted, broken, someone who lost everything in a matter of seconds. Who was he now? Without Emily, without Michael, without the life he built so hard? He took his cell phone from his pocket, hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. Emily's messages were still there, all ignored. Some asked to talk, others tried to justify what could not be justified. Michael had also tried to get in touch, but Daniel didn't open any messages. I didn't need any more explanations. I needed distance. I needed to understand what came after the chaos. Fate took him to a little bar, a discreet place, almost empty at that hour. He walked in without thinking much, sat at a table in the back and ordered a strong drink. The alcohol burned down his throat, but the pain inside him remained intact. There was nothing capable of numbing it. That's when he felt a look on him. The woman was sitting at the counter, alone, holding a glass of wine, her eyes observing him curiously, but without invading his space. Daniel didn't have the strength to care, but something in her expression made him look away. I didn't want to be seen in that state. But she got closer. Can I sit down? It took him a few seconds to respond, but he nodded. Her gaze was calm, non-judgmental, as if she already knew he was carrying an impossible weight. You look like someone who just lost everything, she commented bluntly. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. I lost more than anything. I lost who I was. She held his gaze for a moment, as if she could see beyond what he was saying. I understand. I've been there before. He raised an eyebrow, curious, but didn't ask. Maybe because, deep down, he felt like she really understood. Do you want to know something? She turned the glass between her fingers, thoughtfully. The worst part of betrayal isn't the pain. It's the doubt. What was real and what was a lie? Those words hit Daniel like a punch. Exactly that, he murmured. She smiled slightly, as if recognizing that reaction. I know. And I also know that you can either sink into it or you can come out stronger. He wanted to believe that. He desperately wanted there to be a way out of the hole he was thrown into. But how do you rebuild something after losing all the foundations? Tell me something, she continued. If you could choose between truth and illusion, what would you choose? Daniel looked at her, feeling the weight of the question. It depends. Does the truth always hurt like this? She smiled sideways. The truth destroys you first. Then it sets you free. He looked down, digesting those words. Maybe I'm still in the destruction part, he admitted. She raised her glass in a silent toast. Then take your time. But don't stay there forever. Daniel didn't respond. He just watched the way she looked so safe, as if she had already walked through that same hell and found a way out. Maybe there was hope after all. Maybe there was something beyond the pain. That night he didn't sleep. But for the first time since everything happened, he didn't feel alone in his suffering. Maybe because he now knew that, one day, this could just be a scar. And scars, no matter how ugly they are proof that we survived. Daniel didn't come home that night. Not even the next night. The idea of entering that place where everything fell apart was unbearable. The apartment, every piece of furniture, every corner, every memory, everything was contaminated with the poison of betrayal. He needed distance, needed air. He spent the next few days wandering aimlessly, sleeping in cheap hotels, frequenting no-name bars, observing the city with the feeling that it was no longer his. As if you were on the sidelines of your own life, watching everything happen without being able to reconnect with who you once were. The woman he met at the bar, Olivia, reappeared a few times. Always with an understanding look, without forcing anything, without rushing. She listened to him without judgment, without trying to give ready-made solutions. It was just there. And Daniel realized that he needed that more than he imagined. One morning, sitting at a cafe, he stared at his cell phone screen. Michael's name shone among the unread messages. Emily also tried to talk to him, but nothing she said mattered anymore. His decision was made. There was no going back. But Michael. His blood boiled at the thought of his brother. How did he have the courage? How could you destroy him like that and still try to have a dialogue afterwards? But there was something there, something unfinished. He knew that in order to move forward, he would need to face this last conversation. That night, he parked the car in front of Michael's house. His presence there was an affront to his own pride, but he knew that if he didn't end this the right way, the weight of this betrayal would remain on his shoulders forever. He knocked on the door, and a few seconds later, Michael appeared. The look of guilt was there. But Daniel didn't want to see him suffer, he didn't want to hear empty excuses. He wanted to understand. Michael hesitantly made his way through. The silence between the two was almost unbearable. They entered the room, and Daniel observed everything. It was a place that had once been familiar to him, but now it seemed different. Dirty. Contaminated. I didn't know if you were coming, Michael began, his voice heavy. I didn't know either, Daniel replied dryly. Michael ran a hand over his face, as if trying to organize his thoughts. Do you hate me? Daniel laughed, but it wasn't a humorous laugh. Hate. Michael, you destroyed everything. You were my brother. My blood. I would have done anything for you. And you chose to be the man who took everything from me. Michael lowered his head. I never wanted it to happen like this. I fought it, I swear I did. So you lost the fight, Daniel countered. And now what do you want? For me to understand. For me to forgive you. Michael swallowed hard. I don't know what I want. I just know that. I loved you, Daniel. You were my brother, but I loved you too. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain the wave of anger that threatened to explode. So you loved two people at the same time. And to keep one of them, you chose to destroy the other. Michael ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. I tried to avoid it. I tried to get away from it. But it was stronger than me. Stronger than you. Stronger than years of sisterhood. Then respect. Then dignity. Daniel took a step forward, his voice lower but carrying weight. You could have chosen any woman in the world, Michael. But you chose mine. Silence swallowed the environment. Michael didn't have an answer for that. I'm not here for excuses, Daniel continued. I'm not here to fight, nor to solve anything. I'm here because I need you to understand that, from now on, you no longer exist for me. Michael closed his eyes, as if those words were a physical blow. Daniel. No, Daniel cut him off. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it. He turned, walking to the door, but before leaving, he stopped. I hope it was worth it. And then, without looking back, he left. The night was cold when Daniel got back to the car. His body was exhausted, but his mind was lighter. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was in control of his own story. Olivia called later, asking if he was okay. He answered truthfully, not yet. But I'm getting there. And in that instant, he knew his past was buried. His future was still uncertain, but he knew one thing: he would never again let anyone define who he was. Time passed, but the scars remained. Daniel learned to live with them, but never to forget them. The following months were a continuous exercise in rebuilding, in finding oneself again after being torn apart. The pain that seemed unbearable at first gave way to bitter acceptance. He would never get the answers he wanted, and he might never fully understand how someone he trusted so much could betray him like that. But understanding was no longer the goal. He just wanted to move on. He sold the house he shared with Emily. I didn't want to stay in that place steeped in memories that no longer meant anything. Every corner, every object, every smell reminded me of a love that never really existed. He no longer wanted to live among ruins. He found a new apartment, smaller, without history, a space where he could start over without shadows of the past. His work, which was put aside for a while, became his escape valve. But there was something beyond that, something even he didn't expect. Olivia. She showed up at the worst time of his life, but not to fix him. He was just there, subtly, like someone who understood without having to say much. Conversations with her became part of his routine, and over time, he realized that there was something different there. Something new. Something that carried no lies or ulterior motives. But most of all, something that didn't need to be rushed. For the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't feel like he needed to fill the void with someone else. He just liked being there, next to her, without the pressure of needing to forget what happened. Because the truth is he would never forget. But I would learn not to be defined by it. Emily took another path. He tried to stay with Michael, believing that after everything that had happened, they could make it work. But something wasn't right. Something never was. The relationship that seemed forbidden and intense when it was still a secret was now out in the open. And the truth is, it wasn't everything she thought it would be. The feeling wasn't as strong as I believed, or perhaps it had never been real. Maybe it was just an impulse, an escape from a life that seemed monotonous, a desire to feel something different without thinking about the consequences. Michael tried to hold it in for as long as possible. But it wasn't the same. Emily was no longer the woman he loved when they were in hiding, and he was no longer the man she wanted when there were no longer any barriers between them. The fight started. Small at first, but constant. Emily felt guilty. Michael felt he had lost more than he had gained. Neither of them would admit it, but they both knew they had made the worst mistake of their lives. It was Emily who finished. One day, after another useless argument, he looked at Michael and realized that there was nothing left there. That maybe there never would have been. She destroyed a marriage, destroyed a relationship between siblings, and in the end, she was left with nothing. Repentance came too late. She tried to contact Daniel, but he never answered, never responded. He had moved on, and she was trapped in the void of her own creation. Michael tried to rebuild his relationship with his brother, but some things are irreparable. Daniel no longer carried hate, but he also no longer had room for it in his life. The tie that united them was severed forever. And Michael had to live with that. He lost Daniel, he lost Emily, and in the end, he lost himself. Daniel found peace. It wasn't something that came quickly, nor was it something that came easily. But it came. Little by little, he realized that the betrayal he suffered was not a reflection of him, but of the choices of others. He was not insufficient. He was not weak. He just trusted the wrong people. And now, for the first time, I was ready to trust again. Not in love, not in a relationship, but in yourself. And so life went on. Emily, alone, facing the ghosts of her own decisions. Michael, trying to pick up the pieces of what's left. And Daniel, finally free to live without carrying the weight of those who betrayed him. And you? What did you think of this story? What was the most impactful part for you? Leave your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And remember, betrayal never leads to a happy ending. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Until next time.